I don't see a world in which soccer overtakes the NFL, if I'm really honest with you, albeit it will certainly dislodge other sports. Investing in communities in the US, really important, whether it's at grassroots level, whether there's like some very diverse states or cities that typically don't ever host games. Clearly, being successful on the pitch is never going to be a bad thing when you're trying to get in front of US audiences.
Welcome to the Football Economy, the show where we unpack the financial engines powering football's global growth. I'm Ibrahim.
And I'm Martin. Today we're diving into a very hot topic, how European clubs can crack the US market, a space where soccer or football is battling for attention alongside the NBA, NFL, and even major concert tours in the US.
To help us make sense of it all, we are joined by Neil Joyce, CEO of the CLV Group. His firm is at the forefront of sports consultancy, helping football clubs unlock new revenue streams through data-driven fan engagement.
Neil, great to have you on the show. Thank you and welcome.
Great to be on. Thanks, guys.
So Neil, let's start with the opportunity around fan engagement. Your report, Hearts, Minds, Wallet, identifies that there's an opportunity for 83 million soccer fans, but I think 36.5 million are undecided. Where do you think these fans are geographically located, and also demographically, how can these clubs find them?
Yeah, I think first there's a dual-pronged strategy required for European clubs to crack the US market. First part of it, as you mentioned, that there's 83 million US soccer fans, of which 36.5 million haven't picked a team. So there's a pool of fans or audiences that you need to think slightly differently from the fans that you've already got connections with, whether that's somebody who has downloaded your app, has subscribed to your club's TV channel, or has bought tickets or merch from previous tours to the US, or just generally is engaging with you across your own and operate channels. And that's very much an optimization play. Some clubs would argue that they're doing a great job of tuning those relationships already. We would argue that there's still more opportunity to think about monetizing the existing relationships that you've already got, whether that's directly across some of those revenue streams I mentioned, like ticketing or merch, for instance. But it's also like how valuable those fans are to put partner propositions together. So if you think about all the European clubs, their media boards that they have behind their players or their coach, behind every interview, are fairly well populated by some of the world's leading brands. So there's an opportunity to directly put those brands in front of those fans based upon what those fans want and care about, rather than a mass reach approach, which has typically been broadcast and obviously sponsorship based. Where the opportunity is really exciting from what we see is having a look at that wider unknown audience pool that you've got right now. And it's not as simple as trying to put a shirt proposition or sell tickets or get somebody to download your app. You got to think very, very differently around what the makeup is of what those US soccer fans look like. What we've created here at the CLV Group is what we call a fan identification score. So if you think about a FICO score for credit products in the United States, this is our version of how reliable and how confident you can feel about actually reaching somebody who's a fan of Manchester United, Liverpool, or Barcelona or Real Madrid, versus them just being a very generic football fan. Right, so that immediately gives you a sense of how you want to think differently about those groups of fans and those audiences. The other thing to mention on all of this is how mature that fandom actually is. So have they just watch football games on TV in the US? Do they watch 5 minutes? Do they watch 250 minutes? Do they watch thousands of minutes every year? How engaged are they across all of your social platforms as well? Like getting those kind of fan signals together is like the real portrait that you're trying to portray before you even worry about things like demographics, for instance. We're very much of a mindset of looking at the value of a fan connection beyond a share, a view and a like, which are some of the typical engagement metrics that football clubs measure their success in some of these markets.
Okay.
Right. Great, thank you, and very insightful, Neil. We already before shooting this podcast, we saw that Man City's WhatsApp channel hit already the 25 million mark members. So that's faster than their Twitter growth. And my question to you is: should clubs prioritize owned platforms, like for example WhatsApp, or over traditional social media for US fan growth?
Really good question. And to go back to my earlier answer, it really comes down to what that fan preference looks like. Like, what channels are they most prevalent across? The other point that should really play an increasing role is, what is the path to connect with these fans? So it's not just the channels that you have available to you, but think about that indirect relationship you can connect via influencers, for instance. So influencers use relatively tactically around like the FIFA Club World Cup that's coming on board, the Premier League series that's going to happen again this year, launching new jerseys ahead of the new season. We've seen some like good examples over the last 12 months. I think Barry Keegan launched one of Manchester United shirts last year. Adidas did a full retro look back when they were launching lots of the away jerseys last summer as well, across like Bayern Munich and Arsenal, for instance, as well. I think what you got to take into account is that football or soccer in the US is not the first and foremost sport, right? You're competing with sport, media, and entertainment organizations and fandoms. NBA over-indexes the most heavily for any other sport in the US with soccer. So immediately you could start thinking about, are there some collaborations with some of the leading NBA teams or some of the athletes who play that game as well, along with college sport as well. And then music is obviously going to be a big thing for people to look at in that area as well. We talked heavily last year around Harry Styles' fandom and love of Manchester United, and whether there was a way they could tap into that. And then the other things that we started to look at as well is the success that things like Netflix have had on Formula One. Right, really, really strong storytelling has opened up a totally new marketplace for what Formula One can do in that marketplace. So I believe Premier League clubs outside the broadcast, which they don't control, they can start to control the narrative and the stories that they want to tell in a fairly unique way. And lots of these big European clubs have got lots of legacy stories that they can tell. You think about lots of the US people love the underdog or the hero in a story and tragedy. Many of these clubs that we've mentioned here have that history around transformation, having adversity, counteracting that, and producing really good stories. I don't think they've totally tapped into in terms of like the hearts and minds of what those US fans are looking for. So I think very much content, curation of content has got to be one of the premier areas of focus and investment for the Premier League clubs.
Right. Okay, so you mentioned a few things there. You mentioned narrative, you mentioned story, you mentioned unique. So my question to you basically is going to touch on a few of those. The WWE has over 1.5 social followers, which is basically triple Real Madrid's followership,
Yeah.
which is remarkable in its own right. What can football learn from their narrative-driven engagement model when targeting US audiences?
Yeah, WWE presents its unique opportunity that I don't think necessarily Premier League clubs or European clubs can tap directly into. There's some good learnings that you have. It's probably the only entertainment stroke sport in the world where you've got trained actors and athletes that are combined. We could argue that some performers on the football pitches could be acting given some of the diving that happens, but that's a personal perspective, obviously. So the model has clearly been developed with what the audiences are looking for. How do we crack younger audiences to ensure that the WWE stays relevant? And clearly they've demonstrated that, particularly with the link up with Netflix. Netflix doesn't invest in content unless they know that the audience is there. But they absolutely hugely grown their organization and business over the last 10 years to a certain degree that has meant they know that they can match up content with audiences. So that underlying view of matching up content and development of different content for specific audience groups is a really key learning that Premier League clubs should look into, beyond it being, here's a behind the scenes clip of training that happened yesterday before the next big match, which is of interest for sure, but it doesn't really tell the full story of what fans want. And so investment in audience understanding and audience design is the key learning and output that I would take from both Netflix, but also what WWE's been successfully able to do.
Right. So as you mentioned, Netflix, right now in the US market, especially in the entertainment options, they have everything from Netflix to NFL. And we understand that your data suggests that top clubs like Manchester United or Liverpool could capture around $100 million in the US over the next 3 years, just due to the fan engagement. What's the playbook to hit that 4 to 5% annual growth target in a very crowded market and a very sophisticated market?
Yeah, you're right. It's not as easy as just projecting a number, right? And whilst the data that we've got has given us the size of the prize, there's got to be specific strategies and also commitment to developing those audiences in the market, because as you rightly said, you're competing with some very established players in those marketplaces, and you're also competing amongst yourselves as well on that level. So when we looked at the breakdown of these different revenue streams that can make up that 100 million in some cases, and others obviously a lot smaller, 25 to 30, depending on the club, there's a couple of things that you've got to look at. Obviously, content has got to be a really important play, right? Whether that's licensing the content and the stories that you want to produce yourself, amplifying that reach as well, and monetizing that content further downstream. Interesting things to look at. Digital products, really, really important as well, whether that's a digital membership, whether it's things like collectibles or fan tokens as that market starts to mature. They're the product streams that the football clubs can actually control their own destiny win versus the revenue streams today. It will take some investment. It will take time because some of these products don't exist within the clubs. So it brings me on to another point, is they've got to seek really strong strategic link-ups with key partners. It might be do more of all or nothing series with Amazon. It could be the next Drive to Survive series on Netflix. Disney, again, have been looking and rumoured to be producing content for certain clubs for a few years as well. So that content development, audience development and monetisation is an important piece. Digital products, clearly an important one as well. Linking up within the gaming verticals, because gaming is the entry point to a lot of soccer fans in the US to start engaging with those platforms, and then generally looking at very creative ways to increase new revenue streams. So how do big European soccer clubs become media networks in their own right? So they don't have a lot of inventory available on their owned and operated channels because, one, you don't want to interfere with the fan experience, and two, you've got sponsorship obligations around space on your site. But how do you look at monetizing that through your partners offsite? So we think about some of the biggest media organizations and success in the social platforms, Facebook, Meta, X, YouTube and TikTok. They're all content fueled, and they're all opportunities for you to monetize engagement beyond your own channels as well. The thing that's interesting within all of this is we're not even talking about how do you sell more merch, how do you sell more tickets. We believe that there's obviously incrementality that you can gain on that area, but ultimately these revenue streams that we focus on, we believe far outweigh the opportunity to just fine tune the engagement you've already got with fans.
Okay, so I mean, we're going to touch on merch very soon, but moving into the data-driven engagement and also the 4 C's that is mentioned in your report. Basically, let's start with sort of like Wrexham and the Disney documentary, which apparently drove over 404% revenue jump. Should more clubs be producing in-house content, like, potentially like Man City's 900 annual videos, or what's your take on that?
100% they should be investing more time in curating specific content, not just generic, like big mass plays that some of those productions that you mentioned there do, but it all comes back to like identifying that audience, those fans. What are they more interested in? Are they interested in collaborations with their music stars along with the team versus it just being team-based content and things like that? There has to be a level of uniqueness around the story. Like, everybody's put Wrexham up there as like the utopian state, and clearly they've had phenomenal success in those small parts of the link up that they have with their ownership, and they've got a great story. How easily that is to replicate, I think maybe slightly more challenging. I think that authenticity around the storytelling can't be underestimated. Yet some of these big European clubs, to our point earlier, have got unique stories to tell as well.
Great. 63% of Gen Z consumers consume football content on YouTube. Should clubs double down on documentary series or shift to TikTok-style short clips for American youth?
Yeah, there's no silver bullet to that. I wish there was. It'd make my job and everybody's a lot easier. Clearly, you can't ignore the phenomenon of YouTube and TikTok in terms of the Gen Z engagement and where that looks like. You've got to look at combinations of channels. So there's both short form and documentary form series that you need to curate on that side of things. And again, I think the clubs have started to look at it, but it is an investment that is required to generate these revenues. They prioritize sponsorship and selling products they've already got more often than not, but they are going to get forced to look at more creative ways, innovative ways to capture new markets, because the revenue models that are involved in football at the moment aren't necessarily growing. If you look at like commercial revenues are relatively static in more often not cases. Broadcast media rights almost flat or slight increase in some areas on there. Match day revenues clearly are very topical at the moment. You got lots of new stadium developments or redevelopments that have happened over the last few years. There's obviously some big revenue growth that you can achieve out of that, along with making them 24/7 entertainment venues. So the other play though is you need to control that dialogue and that connection with your fan, because you're going to get more and more disintermediated if you don't adapt. Or if your business model is predicated on disintermediation and just clipping revenue streams as they go through rather than controlling it, that's fine. But it's quite a risky business strategy, the way that we look at it.
All right. So in terms of your CLV's four C's framework, the creativity, collaboration, and more, which I personally think is a game changer, can you explain to us, in your view, the PSG's branding strategy with Air Jordan and potentially how they've unlocked a fan segment in that sense?
Yeah, like PSG, again, got nothing but admiration to what they've done. They're constantly evolving. The story that they've had on the pitch and off of it, like you look at the Galactico era that we believe is now finished, or they're creating new Galacticos from homegrown players and domestic as well. So their story's evolving over time. They've been super smart on cashing in on the global appeal of Paris. PSG was the only team in Paris until I think a new organisation is starting to manifest itself. So they tapped into that. They've looked at the alignment with fashion. So obvious reasons to have a look at collaborations with New York. They've got a mega store, I think, on Madison Avenue now, or have had one for a few years down there. But then you've got how do they capitalize on some creativity with a collaboration? So two of those C's straight away together there. And the Air Jordan link up was really super smart. The Eiffel Tower manifesting itself on a jersey. You're opening up a lifestyle play as well as a football club play to mass audiences in the US who clearly know Michael Jordan, understand Paris, see the likes of Messi, Neymar and Mbappe, and they brought together some really good ingredients to capitalize on high growth of fan growth in that market. They had the highest amount over the last few years, although we've seen that tail off quite considerably in the last 18 months. But that can change again if PSG win the Champions League this year, which they have a fairly decent chance of doing. They've got younger players coming through. It's an interesting time to see where PSG goes next with next sets of creativity and collaboration.
Given that we're here in Germany, so Bayern Munich, we understand that the Golden Fan Record integrates around 52 data sources or data points. But my question would be like, how can smaller clubs compete without these SAP level resources when targeting US fans?
Yeah, there's a couple of approaches they can take. They can invest in some basic profiling of US audiences. That's data sets that are readily available that you can probably get. They should look beyond just doing surveys. A lot of the mistakes people make is relying upon panels of 1,000 fans or understanding viewership audiences, and look, it's guesswork if we're being kind in that instance. But your point around how does smaller clubs scale is starting around like what's the compelling reason why somebody would be interested, and that is about understanding the audience. It could be that there's a really strong like story of a younger club in Germany. It could be Spain, where they've got these super talents who've got big TikTok following or Instagram following, and you start to layering these new kind of modes of connectivity into it, and that would be the starting point before you look at really investing lots of money of unlocking these audiences. Tell a different story in a different format to different groups of people and run some test and learn programs in that area.
All right. So from my understanding, clubs invest heavily in US tours. Post-activation planning like email opt-ins or engagement around op is key. What's the biggest mistake, in your opinion, they make when trying to retain fans in terms of retention?
Unfortunately, a lot of the engagement around a summer tour is very tactical. You got to sell tickets to games, which more often than not the clubs don't control, right? Promoters like Ticketmaster or Live Nation, organisations are in control of that side of things. You also get people to sign up to your club TV channel because you can actually broadcast the games. So you've got that reason to sign up, and we see like big spikes in the clubs that we've worked across, and then it drops off because the engaging level of storytelling isn't there post the tour. And again, it comes back to what do these fans really care about the most? So as you acquire those fans, and that's the way that football clubs need to look now, and they need to think about themselves in a D2C environment, no different to the biggest e-commerce players in the world. It's like, well, what's the lifetime value or expected lifetime value of these fans? How do I look at what they need next? So if I get them to sign up to a club membership or the club TV channel, how many of them should I show a jersey to, or vice versa? And having that kind of like customer life cycle piece in place would be a good start.
With the financial sustainability regulations tightening, how can direct-to-fan strategies like personalized content, merch drops, or even what you've mentioned earlier, NFTs, balance costs and revenues? Will they enter into these FSR regulations? How will this be treated?
Yeah, revenue growth is clearly like the key lever that a club can really do anything about. I mean, short of reducing salaries or player acquisition costs, which last time I checked is quite difficult to do, I don't think they've got much choice but to look at creative ways of monetizing the assets they've got, either through better sponsorship deals or stronger sponsorship deals, or looking at the D2C plays would be the biggest impact. I mean, you mentioned some of these numbers that we've looked at before, and like for clubs adding 50 million in revenue, it's equivalent of like a decent player that you can bring in and cover their wages for a year. And the last time I checked, that's not the most easy thing for a club to do at the moment. There's also lots of discussion around different models of financial fair play where it is tied to revenue and not being capped at some of the levels that it's got at the moment. The emphasis is on the clubs to grow revenue.
Yeah, I agree with you. So moving and transitioning into monetization and niche markets. So beyond tickets, when it comes to club revenue, we know merch and sponsorship drive that. Anime is very huge in US, as you're probably aware, in terms of US fan base. Could a club like Juventus license IP to Crunchyroll, which is obviously the biggest and I'm on sort of like content generator or platform to tap into younger audiences, or do you think it's a bit too much of a stretch for a club like Juventus?
I think through their own content development and their appeal in that kind of animation area, albeit not directly anime, it's shown that they are clearly thinking about it, and they've got content studios that they've launched, some like innovation labs as well. So they seem to have started to look at testing that. We've looked at the anime space quite heavily, not just in the US but globally as well. And you just look to where its origins come from in Japan and what they did with the World Cup jersey in Japan, the collaboration with Adidas as well. And you're starting to see the opportunity there to actually create in that fashion. I think Juventus would be a really interesting one to link up with Crunchyroll. They can both help each other. There's clearly licensing of content, or the development of that content could be further like fueled by the capabilities that a Crunchyroll or another has as well. You've also got the fact that anime is growing really, really quickly. So how many of Juventus's fans could be added to the pool of subscribers that Crunchyroll have? And that goes for a lot of football clubs to look at it as a bi-directional relationship, not a pure licensing relationship.
In this podcast, we are also especially interested in not top tier clubs, but instead middle tier and lower tier clubs. So my question to you would be, how can in this specific example, championship clubs participate in the American market? So without the Premier League budgets, not even the parachute payments, can teams like, I don't know, Leeds United or whatever, leverage the US type players or local partnerships?
Yeah, there's a couple of angles to look at. So I think we would almost like bring Leeds United up into like whether they get promoted or not. I think the exposure and the investment that they've got behind them now and who the players are there will probably give them a bit more of an advantage in terms of where they land in that marketplace. You take a club like Derby County, for instance, and I've got some Derby County friends, so they're good examples. We talk about it a lot. You look at the opportunity for them, right? They are getting the exposure and brand awareness through the broadcast rights deal that the EFL's got in the US. So there is some awareness there, but they then need to create a different level of storytelling and also be visible in the market physically. So whilst pre-season tour games can be like debated in terms of the value of them, how competitive they are, the proximity to fans is not to be unlooked at. So I think Derby should invest, for instance, in like what players resonate the most with US audiences. Are there games that they should be playing? Are there strategic link-ups that they should be looking at? Are there potential investors within the football championship as well that they could tap into some capability there? So yeah, I think there's investment, and who the ownership is really helps irrespective of what size you are, the type of portfolio you're part of. So I spent time looking at Everton with the Freaking Group quite recently, and they own a content development organisation. They've got Roma as well. So you see interesting like trends starting to manifest with football club ownership. The broadcast rights deal that they've got will allow some of the smaller clubs to become more relevant, and Derby have obviously won the the equivalent of the Premier League many moons ago, and they got some stories to tell about that. They nearly went bankrupt several years back. They're rising again. So that's just one example. If they got a good story to tell, they're getting exposure and branding on there. And then it's about how do you want to enter the market, and some of that has to be through physically playing games there as well.
Right. So just in terms of the clubs that we've seen so far, so I think 9 of the top 10 clubs now have over-the-top streaming service, so OTT. Should paywall content like CT Plus be a priority for the US market in terms of revenue generation over the traditional broadcasting deals?
Yeah, you're gonna have to go for both, right? The check that you're getting from the US broadcast deal is gonna definitely outweigh what you can get from direct, albeit over time you can expect the overall fan that you're getting to generate probably on an equivalency rate, same levels of revenue. So I think developing your own content, leveraging your own stories, along with giving the mass appeal of Manchester City in that area is something to look at. I think the story for Man City and CFG, if you like, per se, is that they've got obviously New York City FC in the US, and so there's some potential collaboration that they can do without cannibalizing the different fans that they clearly have together and what the individual fans that they've got as well. So yeah, there's opportunities for City to develop specific content. Clearly being successful on the pitch is never going to be a bad thing when you're trying to get in front of US audiences as well.
PSG's branding strategy blends fashion and culture. Can smaller clubs mimic this with D2C activations like limited edition kits or smart digital marketplaces, NFTs to compete?
Yeah, they absolutely must. They're going to have to get more and more creative to compete with some of the mass-produced plays that you've got from a PSG of this world. You've got some interesting collaborations. You mentioned anime earlier on. I think that would be an interesting link up to create different branding, have some collectibles associated with that as well. You've got some of the big FIFA Club World Cup this summer. You've got the Premier League series, as we mentioned. They create unique opportunities, even from a collectible perspective, specific merch associated with specific games as well. That's a tool to start building up the pool of the audiences, whether you're a big club or a smaller one in that area right now. And then it's getting really super creative with some of the link-ups with some of the music stars. So believe that Iron Maiden are big fans of West Ham, and they've had some collaboration over the last couple of years on some interesting pieces there. You look at the release of a lifestyle range with United last year that they did with the Stone Roses as well, which sold out in a matter of days, but very, very focused on a specific audience and a specific fan base. So it's showing that there's pockets of success. It's then how do you replicate that across your different fans and audience groups?
Right. So in terms of trying to exploit, the diverse audiences that the club might have, it's found that Bayern have, 95% of their social followers are non-German. I mean, this is expected. How should clubs localize content for specific demographics, specifically, let's say the US, because we have the Club World Cup coming up. We have the World Cup in 2026 also. So in terms of demographics, like the Hispanic demographic or the Asian American fans, what's your take?
Yeah, it's coming out with every one of these clubs has to have a US business strategy and a US fan growth strategy, and it will all start with what that audience or that fan design looks like. So what do they care about? What do they look like? What are they interested in? How valuable could they be? So there could be pockets of fans who aren't necessarily going to contribute a lot of money directly to you, but they're the type of fans that your brand sponsors are actually interested in reaching. So it's kind of marrying up that D2C revenue play and that growth with how valuable can these fans be for your sponsors as well. And there's clearly going to be differences between a Hispanic fan, an Asian fan, high net worth individuals, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. They're the main categories that you'd be looking in and going, well, how does that look against the sponsors I've got today? What propositions have I got today that I can deliver experiences to those fans versus what do I need to develop? How valuable is it going to be? And what's my payback going to be from a profit perspective, not just what these direct or indirect revenue streams can look like?
Great. That's, I would say, the perfect segue to our last segment. So Netflix $5 billion WWE deal marks their first live sports move. Would you say this is the starting point or the pit of the iceberg, for example, for a Champions League live streaming from Netflix?
I thought about this question actually a couple of times, so I'm glad that you raised it. Not entirely sure, to be honest with you. I think the WWE had a very unique value associated with what it could do globally on there. You've seen Amazon buy the rights to the Champions League and then started to back out of the rights on that side of things because they've been able to achieve I think from Premier League investment and other investments on there, the level of subscribers that they wanted. And they've got an increasingly mature advertising product associated with all these things. Netflix, on the other hand, and this is why I think it's still possible, have been launching ad products within the programming. I wouldn't rule it out. I just don't think it's as a unique opportunity as what they did through WWE. It's also being able to scale the number of matches and having them live streaming. And clearly technology exists to do it, but does Netflix dilute from its core around entertainment, storytelling in that area? And does it potentially risk alienating some of the audiences that they've already got by investing more in those areas rather than in what they've done to date? But yeah, I think the value of the Champions League is still huge.
Yeah, this is true, and it's ever expanding. Over commercialization, like the Super League backlash, could alienate fans. With not all fans created equal, I think this is a phrase that was coined in one of the podcasts that you were engaged in. How do clubs avoid pushing US audiences away?
Yeah, it's going to be a balance, right? I think the clubs have done a good job in difficult circumstances with their US audiences, right? They've not been frequently present in market. Right, some of them probably play every 2 years. Some have played for the last 2 or 3 years. I think United, it's third year in a row that they're going over there now. I think being present and being consistent and showing it's not just to sell tickets and merch is like a really good starting point. I think investing in communities in the US really important, whether it's at grassroots level, whether there's like some very diverse states or cities that typically don't ever host games, but you go there and you're giving back in those areas. But ultimately, it all really comes down to being consistent and being relevant to that marketplace. It's like any product that consumers engage with, right? You either need it or you want it. That relationship gets tarnished if the brand either continues to be relevant for you, or you find something better somewhere else. I think being frequent, being consistent, and driving some level of like value exchange is going to be the key thing to keep those US audiences there. I don't think the Premier League clubs or the European clubs need to worry about the storytelling of the European Super League impacting those US fans the way they would in their home markets. And clearly, you can look at the home markets as being where the most loyal and most like participative fans traditionally have been, and they're the ones you like. Any loyalty program, they're your VIPs. Your job is don't muck it up, give them a good product and keep them happy when they're engaging with you, right? And to a degree, that's the same in the US without the backdrop of like going through turnstiles and the experience every single week there.
Yeah, just
Neil,
to jump in quickly,
go.
I think that's called high value customer, high value audience. So marketed.
It is. And it comes back to like lifetime value. At the end of the day, you can't value a fan based upon like, oh, they bought one shirt this season, they're going to buy a shirt for the next 10 years. You've got to look at the totality about that relationship and the value of that fan connection.
For sure. Neil, so 2 out of 5 WWE fans is a woman. How can football, I don't know, close the gender gap in the US fan engagement or address directly these fan base or potential fan base?
Yeah, there's an increasing like growth story being told in women's football, and soccer in the US for women is big. It's been huge. It's been bigger than men over the last few years or so. So I don't think that there's that challenge or issue there. It's just a continual investment in the women's game. It will naturally grow in those areas. And European football, the women's European Champions League is getting good exposure. They've got some great stars in those areas. We know from looking into the likes of PSG, Barcelona, and Olympic Lyon, actually in the US, they got huge fan bases of women fans and also men who follow the women's teams there. So that diversity bridge, I don't think is as cute as what some people may believe. And clearly WWE has got women athletes that are involved in it as well. So there's a natural like curve, I believe, of women in sport and entertainment that is keeping really strong space. So I don't think it's something for the clubs to be concerned about. I think they just got to keep doing what they're doing and actually continue to promote and invest around the women's game in these growth markets like the US.
Right. So in terms of other growth markets, I think Chelsea's Infinite Athletes integration boosted match viewing engagement by, let's say, just around 50%. Are data-driven broadcast enhancements the future for markets such as the US in terms of fan experiences?
Yeah, it's wrapping your arms around being data-driven, leveraging the technology that exists and being comfortable with it as well, and being comfortable working with partners or specialists to do these things. And some of it's being like accelerated through Infinite Athlete, for instance, in that area there. We've seen some fairly big digital transformation companies become partners of some of the big European clubs as well. I think City have got a deal with Publicis Sapient. I think DXC works in Manchester United. And Chelsea have just announced a deal with a Vietnamese technology company as well. So it has to extend beyond just purely being sponsorship. It has to be, we can improve the connection and deep engagement we have with fans by leveraging partner capabilities beyond just building that stuff out yourself.
Great, thanks. So now entering into prediction territory, will financial sustainability rules force clubs to prioritize direct-to-fan revenue over, for example, splashy tours?
If I had a crystal ball,
Yeah.
we're looking maybe 2-3 years out from where we sit today. I think they're going to be forced to. They're going to have to do both, but they're going to have increased focus on looking at the D2C, because the continual conveyor belt of pre-season tours is one thing, and clearly there's revenues to gain, but they're a drop in the ocean compared to what the value could be if you get that deep-seated connection with fans in global markets, right? And the US is a big example. We believe it should be the priority market, but clearly there are other global markets that you're going to have to take different approaches to open them up as well.
Maybe even virtual match experiences or smart stadium upgrades?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen some great examples in US sport of some of the very small audiences they get to pop-up bars, for instance, or pseudo-virtual experiences with those great screens, and they look fantastic. It's like, how do you scale that? And it has to be, there's no substitute for watching it on TV and probably in the stadium, but then there's pockets of audiences that are never going to be able to do it. So how do you create a format or a way in which they can leverage that engagement and the content the way that they want?
Right. So just expanding that. So in terms of potentially championship clubs and trying to see them participate in this growth market, as you said, the US market is a growth market long term. In your expertise, what's the blueprint for the championship clubs to win the US fans without, superstars, such as Mbappe, Bellingham, and so on and so forth? Would you say maybe potentially being a first mover when it comes to digital fan experiences, or what are the sort of like strategies would you give to them?
Yeah, so like as we were talking about earlier on, right, you've got the halo effect of broadcast rights, which like you can't like underestimate. That's valuable, because without an awareness play, it's a lot harder to be able to crack those audiences. You then have got to have investment into that market. There's no, we're going to go and play one game and we're going to make 200,000 or whatever it is for doing it. It's got to be like, what's the story that a championship club can tell on the back of what they do on the pitch, the history of the stories that they've got, and starting to really package up that content. The content should be the lead play, right? That's what you're engaging with on the pitch. So how do you tell a different story around it? Be visible in that market as well. Like go play games over there, right? You've got to go do that. And then think about like, what are the creative collaborations you can do? It's got to be like, understand the influencer communities who may have similar passions to what Derby exhibit or their partners have, and then leverage that to create a halo effect of story. But like I've said to a lot of people, is football in particular doesn't have a key ingredient, which is called patience, whether it's on the pitch or off it. That was got to be part of the makeup. There's got to be a long held belief that the revenues available in the US market are at a level that requires $1 million, $2 million of investment to generate 10 over the next 2 or 3 years.
Great, Neil. So we're done with the core part of our conversation interview, and we're now heading to our last section, which is, we call it the rapid fire question. So just 3 questions, 3 questions each, and 2 or 3 words or a short sentence to answer the question is more than enough. So my first one, and I think you have already anticipated the answer, most overrated US city for preseason tours.
Very difficult. I don't think there's a most overrated one, if I'm being absolutely honest. I think there's some that are undercapitalized on. So you've got places like Montana, like beautiful, but doesn't really have a big soccer stadium. So I think there's untapped opportunities.
Untapped, yeah, that's good. You go.
Right. And then overrated platform for fan growth. Would you consider Twitter overrated? I mean, X now, or LinkedIn?
I don't think LinkedIn supports like fan growth, to be honest with you, of football clubs. I think it's a platform that clearly football clubs are providing content onto more than they have before. It's these newer formats and new contents, and I'd actually call influencers like platforms now, and I think that's where there's going to be a lot of growth. TikTok's fueled it, Instagram's done it over years as well. X provides great community of passion. Let's just say that, whether positive or negative. Clearly, it's a go-to place that many of us have used as well. But I think there's more than just that now. There's a lot of other places to go.
One data point that clubs usually miss when finding where the fans are.
They rely upon surveys rather than actual fans and where fans are.
That's accurate.
This is not good. It sounds very archaic, and I see why the CLV Group is very needed in this industry. Your opinion on the Baller League or the Kings League, if you have any strong opinions on them?
I'm excited to see what they do. They've clearly created a lot of interest. They're opening up a different audience. I think the phenomenon of YouTubers, again, is going hand in hand with the success of that. It's opening up a much younger audience profile. I think like we talk to people about Gen Alpha, and clearly that's a play in that area, but it's also bringing through different levels of interest around the participation and the competitiveness of something that extends from the Champions League or the Bundesliga or Premier League, for instance, as well. So it's an interesting format. I think it's going to open up new audiences. I think it's all good.
Taking into account or having in mind the long-term US growth of football, would you rather have a Netflix $5 billion WWE deal or an Apple MLS rights deal?
Really good question there. I mean, if I'm sitting here and I'm Richard Masters of the Premier League, I think I know which one I'm going to take. I think the Apple one with MLS is pretty interesting. And again, you talked about, would Netflix come and do the Champions League deal? I think you got to look at Apple in the same lens. They're clearly proof of concept and a pretty hefty one at that they're already invested in.
And then the final rapid fire question is basically, would you consider the US soccer market a rival to NFL in the long term, even with the potential gains in terms of revenue?
It's really interesting. So like NFL's clearly really well established, and like the money it generates every year from having like not that many games is like phenomenal. And the Super Bowl is like, it's the World Cup, right, of American football. And it's just, I think the NFL's got a good international growth opportunity as much as what European football has over in the States, albeit I think the soccer adventure is a little bit further along on that area right now. I don't see a world in which soccer overtakes the NFL, if I'm really honest with you, albeit it will certainly dislodge other sports. And we've seen it already, right? You've had the tried and trusted NFL, you've got NBA, you've got the MLB as well. You've got soccer now that I think has overtaken Major League Baseball as the third most viewed sport in the US.
Neil, you've been extremely generous with us and with your audience, with our audience. You have given us a playbook for finding fans, engaging with them, and keeping them in the US market. So thank you very much for your time and for your insights.
Thanks, guys. Really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil, so much. That's a wrap. If you've enjoyed this dive into the football industry, specifically around the US market, then please subscribe for more of this sort of content. And until next time, thank you. Goodbye.